here with Marley June Cummings. I'm so excited to talk with you, Marley. How are you today?
I'm feeling pretty good today. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you too. I think this is important.
Yeah, so we are here to have a chat about just everything that's going on in childcare here in British Columbia. It's a very challenging time with COVID-19, and I'm so honored and thrilled that you have chosen to join me for a conversation to talk about things. So why don't we just sort of lay a bit of the foundation here? You offer and operate a childcare program in British Columbia, don't you?
Yes, I do. I operate a 16-child center in James Bay and Victoria, and it is Blue Heron Montessori.
Wonderful. And so how long have you been offering and operating that program?
This is our second year, so we're pretty new. We just opened the year before, and it's going very well so far, I would say.
Excellent. That's great. And so, pretty new. I think the exciting part about doing these conversations is that I'm talking with operators that are fairly new, like yourself, as well as operators and educators that have been in the field a long time. So we're getting a great cross section. So I'm excited to hear sort of what your feedback is about how things have been going. So before I dive in and ask you a lot of questions specific to the COVID-19 situation, maybe I can just ask you a little bit about yourself. How did you come to be in the field of early childhood education? I always love hearing people's stories, so maybe you can share a bit with us about how you arrived into the field.
So I have been interested in caring for young children pretty much my whole life. It's something I started as a young teen doing nannying and babysitting, and then carried on as soon as I had the opportunity to leave school and start in my career. I was looking for positions either in childcare centers as an assistant or working with children specifically through out-of-school programs. So I think my first big step into it was I moved to Calgary, and there was a lot of opportunities there for people to teach in childcare centers that probably wouldn't have the same opportunities in BC. So I got a job at a private school there, working in a junior kindergarten classroom. And across the hall from us, there was a Montessori classroom as well. They were a dual stream school. So that's how I was introduced to Montessori. I got to watch them from the classroom every day and was so interested in it. So I'm thankful to the teachers that were there that really mentored me and showed me the differences in the program. And I think that's where I got the Montessori spark and where I really started my full education in early childhood.
That's wonderful. And so then you came back to BC,
Yes,
and
after a
at
year
what
there,
point?
after a year in Calgary, I came back to BC, and then I did online learning. So I took my ECE through Northern Lights College, and as I was doing my online learning, I was working in different Montessori centers and different childcare centers. I worked in about 6 different centers over the last few years. I really wanted to have a broad span of experience and see what different places were like and how they did things before I decided to embark on my own journey of opening
Good
a
for
center.
you. Good for you. So in your program, then you care for 16 children.
Mhm.
So it's yourself and obviously you have another staff member, or do you have more than another staff member? How many people are working in your program?
So we have 3 staff members, I'm
Okay.
included. I actually co-own the center with another person.
All right.
So the both of us work there, as well as we have an ECEA staff member.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm.
And then of your 16 families or 16 spaces, I'm assuming are you possibly providing care for more than 16 children? So you're serving more than 16 families? Do some of your children come part-time?
No, we just have 16 children that are full-time.
16. Got it. Okay. Excellent. Well, I mean, that's wonderful, and it's exciting. You're in this new sort of stage of your program is maturing and growing and evolving, and it's very it's really neat. And then of course along comes this not small situation with
Yes.
COVID-19. Of course, you know, globally and in Canada and in British Columbia, I mean, this is something that is massive. It's far beyond just the childcare sector alone. So I just want to say that at the outset of us kind of diving into this part of the conversation. It's a really big thing, and it's a scary time that we're all grappling with, right? So so we're working our way through things, as a nation and as a province, individual families and communities all together. Yet at the same time, here we are in the childcare sector, and it's been interesting how things have unfolded in BC. Why don't I can add in some commentary, but I'm super interested to hear sort of your perspective as a childcare operator. How are you feeling at this point in time about how things have unfolded here in BC related to childcare and COVID-19?
Unfortunately, I'm feeling pretty sad and angry about it, I'll be honest. I think it's a common tune that I've seen with all the groups and forums that I'm a part of and advocating for online, which is the only way we can really do anything right now.
Right. Yeah.
But that seems to be the general feeling, and I think that's how I'm feeling as well. I'm feeling overwhelmed and left behind by my government.
Right. And so let's sort of back it up a little bit. Like, obviously BC, BC took a slightly different approach, it seems, than other provinces. Most other provinces in Canada seem to fairly quickly determine that it was appropriate to close childcare facilities and then take the step of opening some care facilities specific to frontline workers and healthcare workers. In BC, we didn't really do that. I mean, from your perspective as an operator, how did you interpret what BC was doing? Because I know that there was quite a lot of confusion about what BC was doing. So I'm interested to hear, as you on the ground, working in a program, dealing with families on a day-to-day basis, what's gone on for you over the last, 3 to 4 weeks as this has escalated?
Well, we had a regular scheduled spring break happening from the 16th to the 20th for 1 week. So the day before, or about the week before, about midweek, maybe the Wednesday, I guess that would be like the 12th or something, things started.
In March, we're talking like,
yes,
when
in
we're
March.
In March. So, okay, just to be clear.
Yes. So the week before our scheduled spring break, things started to seem like they were happening fast with watching the news and COVID and cases rising. And through the online groups I'm a part of, there seemed to be a string of movement in the early childhood educators and childcare providers of saying, we need to prepare for this. We need to write policies. We need some kind of coverage for what might happen. So I quickly became involved in that. I started reading other opinions of different childcare centers, reading what they were planning on doing. And there was actually a policy, like a template policy, sent out circulating saying, here's what you could do. This is a way to cover yourselves. If we all come together and do this, then we can protect our businesses and protect the children for this pandemic, because we had no idea how the government would react.
And do you know where that template policy came from?
I think it's the BC Childcare Owners Association.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure
that's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to hear, because I know that there's been a variety of different things. So I know that the BC Childcare Owners Association have done a number of different things, but I wasn't sure if that's the policy that you were referring to. So
yeah, that specific policy, which basically said it would cover ourselves for 30 days, so that we would charge families the same fee as usual for up to 30 days to cover ourselves for what could happen, so we wouldn't lose our centers and still be able to pay rent in case of the pandemic. And so there was a few different modifications I saw in other people's policies, depending on the amount of children they had, or they were willing to stay open a little bit longer. Maybe they were going to charge families a little bit smaller fees. But for the most part, it seemed to be this was the policy we were going to use. So I quickly wrote that policy, made a couple different changes for our center, just in terms of like how we would handle the sickness and how long it would go. And then I also added that we would, as well as keeping the 30-day policy, we would be referencing what the Minister of Health would say and take that into consideration for our policies. Okay. And that I would continually update families as I was updated.
So you were really taking a proactive approach here to try to address this. Now, when this was happening, because quite often as childcare organizations and operators, we do look to government for direction in key moments, right? Or we looked definitely as far as I'm aware, any other time any major health issue happens in a childcare facility or that's happening in the community, we definitely look to licensing for guidance, right? So were you in this time, was there anything that was coming to you from any level in government that was sort of telling you anything to consider?
Absolutely nothing. We were learning
Oh,
things
okay.
as everyone else was by just watching the news and thinking for ourselves. There was zero guidance from VHA, zero guidance from our personal licensing officer, and zero guidance from the government. So we just had to go upon.
Is that, is, just so somebody who's watching who might not know, who is that you're referring to? Is that
VHA
the,
is Vancouver Island Health Authority.
got it. Okay, just wanted to be sure, because we have probably people all around the province that will watch these videos. So from your local health authority in your region, you weren't getting any information either.
No.
Wow. So that's a hard place to be in. You know, I mean, so you must have been feeling quite uncertain. And I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm thinking that must have been hard, because you're trying to plan for the children returning from spring break. Is that kind of the place that we're in at that point? You were, or did you?
Yes.
Okay.
So I wanted to send out the policy prior to spring break happening, because I had a feeling that week things were going to start happening, whether they were going to do closures or we were going to really know what was happening. So I wanted the policy sent out and agreed to by all the families prior to that Friday when we would break for spring break. So that's what I did. I sent it out to all the families and asked them to please respond with "I agree" through email, so we'd have written record that they did agree to the policies, and all my families did agree.
Okay, yeah. So then you were in that place now where you had your families that were agreeing to the policy, and then what happened at that point?
Then on the Monday, I think that's the day that we heard that all BC schools would close.
Right.
And so part of our policy was saying we would follow the public school system. So we would only close if the public schools decided to close, which is something that we usually do anyways per our regular contract, is if there's a snow day for public schools, we follow the closures. So it made sense for the families and for us as well to follow the public school system. And just shortly after that was announced, it was said that also childcare centers would remain open. So that left us.
How did you feel when you heard that?
I didn't know why. I couldn't find any logic in that choice other than perhaps for essential workers, but then why would that not apply to children ages 6 and up for the exact same reason for closing the schools? So it just it didn't make any sense to me, especially as younger children, as we all know, are excellent germ spreaders, even more so than elementary schools, which have like proper cleaning staff. We don't have cleaning staff. We just are ECEs doing it ourselves. So I was shocked and didn't understand the choice.
Yeah. I think it was, I mean, certainly that's something that I've heard from many different providers, that it was a confusing time. And I think what almost made it even harder was that, of course, in the face of this, global pandemic, every day we are hearing on the news, new protective measures, new things that need to be happening. And yet, and we're hearing that other provinces are closing childcare, right? And I think by that point, we were starting to hear, I think in Alberta, there had actually been a case in Alberta of a COVID case in a childcare facility in Alberta, or a suspected case. So it was a lot, right? It was a lot. Now, I think it would be helpful if you could share, because I think sometimes there's a misconception. People hear, especially people that maybe don't know a lot about the field of early childhood education and childcare programs, they tend to believe that we have a lot of government funding that comes in and that we're well looked after. And so they're not really understanding the concerns that, that we might have in terms of what this could potentially mean if parents aren't able to pay their fees, and or if we have a sudden drop in enrollment and all of that. So can you just, I mean, you don't have to go into great detail, but in your own version, what does it mean when sort of the bottom falls out for even a childcare center? Certainly we're not like a coffee shop or, you know, another kind of business, but we are bottom line, whether we're nonprofit or private, we still have bills to pay, right? So what were your main concerns in this moment as all this was happening?
So because we had our 30-day policy, which I thought was still valid, quickly learning not, I thought we would be okay maybe for the month. But as soon as it became clear that we weren't able to receive government funding while also maintaining our own policies, that was made very clear, is that whatever your own policy you have, you cannot use that any longer. If you'd like government funding, you need to follow the specific government guidelines pertaining to that funding. So the funding that we usually receive per month is really not very much. It's maybe the cost of one student, maybe a little bit more, which, as anyone knows, is not enough to run a center, especially because I live in Victoria, BC, which I don't know if many people know, but the rent is incredibly high.
Right.
So we pay a lot to rent our space. It's a very big amount of money. And so the government funding we would receive, which if you close is 2 times your regular funding, that would not cover even half of our rent. And then the funding we receive, which is 7 times if we stay open, will cover our rent, but it will not cover enough wages for the staff. It won't cover the cleaning supplies we need. It won't cover the health insurance costs that we have, or the costs of just running the program in terms of like supplies that we need.
Yeah. So basically, if sort of my recollection of how things kind of unfolded is they said that child care programs weren't going to close. It actually took a little bit of, I think, a bit of advocacy and pushing before the government came out to even say that they would really be doing anything to support childcare, right?
It was
probably a week in there where we didn't really know what was happening. And so I think that's a big part of where the pandemic policy and, you know, people were you were trying to cover your bases basically to make sure that in the event of this horrible situation really unfolding, that there would be a program for your families to come back to, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
That's kind of the bottom line of it. And so that was a genuine fear.
Yes, we were very sure that if we didn't do something, we would lose our business and lose our center. That was absolutely clear to us. I had even called our accountant during it and spoke to them, and they said, yeah, if you don't do something, if something doesn't happen, you will not be able to continue this business. You will have to close.
Right. So very legitimate concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And that week that you spoke of was an incredibly stressful and scary week for us. It was every day watching the news, watching the updates, waiting every minute through the Prime Minister's speech and every minute through Dr. Bonnie Henry's speech, waiting for some mention of childcare providers, which was never given until, thankfully, a reporter asked a question. And we got this much information, which we had to go on and try and say, what are we going to do with this one sentence spoken by Dr. Bonnie Henry, no other information, nothing sent to us.
And so, I mean, I'm glad you said that, because, you know, that's something that really played on my mind too. Like, why is it that we had to wait for the media to ask a question before the provincial government even said anything about childcare? You know, I mean, how did that make you feel when they weren't closing childcare, but they weren't addressing the in any way? It didn't seem they were addressing in any way. Now, maybe behind the scenes they were, but certainly we didn't know that as childcare, as the childcare sector.
Oh, I think it was handled really, really poorly, unfortunately. And I lost a lot of confidence and faith in the government and the choices of the Ministry for Health after that had happened. I thought, how could they forget such a huge amount of children and families and providers? We are really the backbone of what happens when people go to work, other than the elementary school systems. Any children younger than that, I don't know what the exact numbers are. I'm sure there's some great statistics you could add in, but it's a lot of people. It's a lot of families. So to have us all uncertain, scared, very, very scared, not only us as childcare providers, but the families were scared to send their children to school. They didn't know if they'd have support. They didn't know what they could do. So it was it was really shocking to me that that's how they handled that, and that not only were we waiting for the reporters to ask the question, but they weren't allowed any follow-up questions. So whatever
Right.
tiny answer we got, that was it. Good luck, try and figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I think, I mean, we focused a little bit in this conversation, obviously, on the funding side of things, but equally important is child safety, right? The health and well-being of the children in programs and the staff working with those children. And so with a lack of information coming out, I'm sure you were not only worried about, you know, what this would mean financially for your program, but as you sort of mentioned about the health and safety side of things. What's going through your mind with all of that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm in my third trimester of pregnancy right now. So
wow, okay.
I myself am in a scary situation, just purely for me personally. My co-owner, who owns the center as well, who's the other ECE, she has asthma and a pre-existing lung condition. So both of us were terrified to find ourselves in this position. And, you know, thankfully our families were so understanding and so supportive. So they were just willing to do what we needed to do for everyone to be safe. But I can only imagine if I did have lots of families at my center who were tier 1 or people who were essential service workers that were exposing themselves to the other people in the community, as they must do for their positions, and they were insisting upon coming into the childcare center. I don't know how I would handle that. I don't know what I would do. And then it's also exposure to the other families. And it's, you know, everyone was just really scared.
Well, and it's interesting because I know one of the things that many programs have grappled with, and it's not just childcare programs. I mean, this is an issue for frontline healthcare workers, but access to, appropriate, personal protection equipment and, cleaning supplies and materials. I mean, I've heard of a lot of childcare programs having difficulty even right now being able to access bleach, which in childcare is like, that's our frontline kind of, that's our go-to product for at the most basic level, being able to do basic sanitization. So if we're kind of debating staying open and offering a service, but we don't actually have access to cleaning supplies, that's really concerning in the face of a pandemic.
Yes, I don't feel like we were prepared to be safe or to keep the children safe. We would, because of all the recommendations made by Dr. Henry and by Trudeau, the request of staying home and staying safe, and if you must go out, you need to follow all these safety precautions. There was no way we could meet that at our center at that time. Like we have had to do a huge program upheaval of how we will handle all these things, write way different policies, prepare ourselves by buying all these materials for the center, which we have not yet been able to find. We found a few, but we're not fully prepared yet to reopen. And it just feels unsafe. And I can't imagine, because thankfully we had that 1 week grace period that we were planning on closing anyways. But I have no idea what centers were doing that were staying open this whole time, how they were scrambling or panicking or what they were able to access themselves.
That must have been really, really difficult. And I'm looking forward to, well, not looking forward, but because I don't want to hear these hard stories from centers, but at the same time, I want people to be able to share their voice and their concerns and their stories as to what has happened, because I think that's being lost in the midst of everything, right? And it's important that at the very least we document this, so that as a sector and as government, we can learn moving forward. I mean, hopefully we never have to face something like this again, but this is, very at a basic level, crisis and emergency planning at the most basic levels. So there's lots of things for all of us to learn moving forward. Now, so you talked a little bit about, this level of funding support that's available. So in BC, the government have offered now for programs that stay open, and it's not mandatory to stay open, although it took a little while for them to clarify whether or not centers could choose to close or open. So that was that was challenging during that time, right? People didn't know ultimately when they did decide that they would offer funding, whether or not, if they chose to close, whether there would be any access to funding. But now there is some funding that has been made available. What are you doing for your program? What decision have you made?
We will be staying open to receive the funding. That is the only way we could continue to have our business. As I said before, the closure funding is not enough for us to cover anything, and we would have lost the business. So we have no choice but to stay open.
Wow. So here you are in a situation now. You're in your third trimester of pregnancy. You're co-owner of the center. Your other ECE who's working in the program has asthma. Both of these, as far as both of your situations from a health perspective, as far as I'm aware, would be that you should be avoiding contact and very much doing self-isolation. So how is that going to, yet you're faced with this health challenge, right? This very serious health challenge, but also the reality that you could lose this business, this childcare facility. And I don't mean just your business, but this service that serves 16 other families in your community that is valuable and important, and childcare will be needed ultimately when the economy comes back. But it sounds like what has been offered from the government is putting you in a horrible position.
It really is. We're totally backed up into a corner.
Wow.
It's sad that this is where we're at, but we have no choice. We've looked at it a million different times from a million different perspectives, and this is the only option to do moving forward, other than saying no to the funding and charging all our families full fees, which is not fair to the families. We can't do that to them.
It's probably not realistic in that, we're all in a place where income has dropped for everyone collectively, right? And we're all waiting for various federal benefit programs to kick in and provincial benefit programs and all of these things, like where it remains to be seen where the dust kind of settles, right? For all of us. So are any of you, do you have any frontline healthcare workers in your program now that will be needing to send children?
I do currently. The families, we do have some frontline staff, but they do have one other parent or another family member in their household who's willing to look after the children. And to be honest, they've come forward and saying, we don't want to expose the center. We don't want to send our children in because we could be bringing home this scary pandemic. So they have said we do not need the care. Even though we are frontline, we will not be bringing our children in for the health and safety of everyone else. But as per agreeing to the government terms of receiving this funding, we have to accept essential service workers if they are sent to our facility. We have to accept them, which is also scary.
So is there's no choice?
There's no choice. From my understanding, when I read the contract and the agreement, that we do not have a choice in refusing people to come to our center, which is different than what they've said on the phone conversations, which were the teleconferences. They said the government had different times you could call in and ask them questions and they would give you clear answers. So it was asked many times, from my understanding, are we allowed to say no to other people coming to our center? And the answer was
and I was on 2 of those conference calls. These were conference calls that happened where the provincial government, through the Ministry for Children and Family Development, the childcare branch, offered for operators to call in, just for anybody wondering about the calls we're talking about. So there were times that people could call in and ask questions. So you obviously called in and you heard people asking, and I heard that too, that it sounded like a program, could determine that a child might not be a match for their program, or that there was some, let's say, wiggle room, in terms of that. But now you're seeing the contract that has come in relation to the funding, and you're interpreting it differently?
Yes, from what I can read and from my understanding, it seems as if we don't have a choice in accepting other families, which opens us up to a whole nother level of exposure, as well as not only exposure to COVID, but that we don't know who these families are. We don't know their practices. We don't know the way they approach things with their children. We don't know
Right.
what's happening at home. So we're just going to be apparently sent a flood of families who may need care that we know nothing about. We don't have a chance to interview or talk with or see if it's a good fit beyond just the risk of the COVID exposure.
Right.
And then also we got personal calls from our licensing officers who are employed by Vancouver Island Health Authority who asked us if we were open to it, to accepting other frontline workers. We said we didn't really feel comfortable with that. And they said, okay, no problem, that's totally fine. And this was prior
Wow.
to
So a
receiving that
lot
call.
of conflicting information.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm hoping that we're not going to have a whole bunch of families coming in. Not that I don't want to provide care for those people who need it. I think that's important and that needs to be addressed in a different way. But I'm feeling scared and uncertain of what's going to happen.
Right, because the bottom line is, I understand when I think obviously there needs to be emergency childcare for frontline healthcare
Yes,
workers.
yes.
There's no question about that, because
Mhm.
those individuals are doing, I mean, we need them to be able to do their work, and they are putting themselves at risk every single day to
Mhm.
essentially try to save us, right? You know, I mean, that's a massive part of their job.
Mhm.
But at the same time, if our solution to the childcare, and this is just as my basic fundamental understanding of it, if our solution to this childcare problem that we face actually creates more opportunity for risk, and especially in individuals who are high risk or immunocompromised or pregnant or all of those things, isn't that kind of a recipe for disaster? Right?
Exactly.
Right?
I'm
And
really
and yeah, wow. I'm just kind of like, I'm absorbing all of that, and it's a
mm.
lot.
I'm wondering why on earth it hasn't been across the country the same terms. It seems like every other province has a better plan. Why is BC lacking behind? Why haven't they utilized the staff that are currently in elementary schools coming back from spring break? There's so much space there. There's people who are possibly better trained in handling this, who would volunteer and say, I'm an ECE, I'm healthy, I'm able, I would like to work, and then compiling the children in the one space. I know I've heard concerns from other early childhood educators and childcare providers that, oh, well, the child will be in a different space than they're used to, and it might make them uncomfortable and unnecessarily stressed out, which I do agree, it will be challenging for the children. But in the end, it's about the health and safety of everyone as a whole. And if we're putting smaller people at risk by forcing them to take in these other children, and by smaller people I mean, sorry, smaller facilities,
Yes.
it's not fair. I don't think it's not a
No.
fair ask.
It's a very big ask. It's a very big ask, and
Mm.
it's I think, unfortunately, this whole situation has exposed a lot of issues with communication, a lot of issues with the approach that the government has taken. I understand that it's really challenging in a time like this not to consult with community, and like there needs to be clear direction that's given and all of that. But the surprising thing to me is that there had been quite a lot of outreach to the province on the part of many of the professional associations and things in our field in advance of this,
Mm-hmm.
warning of the possible concerns. Yet that didn't really seem to, I don't know why there wasn't sort of more interaction at that point, because here we are now in the situation that we're in now. And the bottom line is that, here you are in your program, and you're worried for your individual health and that of your coworker and that of the children and families that you're serving and your business and all of it. This is probably the most challenging place you'll ever be in the field of childcare. Talk about immersion by fire, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you mentioned that many other groups had come forward to the government. I know ECEBC and the BC Center, the Childcare Owners Association, both wrote long documents stating their concerns and sent them in way before this happened, as well as listening to the news and the media and hearing people saying, or Dr. Bonnie Henry saying that they've been monitoring this for a month or more. So they had so much time. They were apparently monitoring and preparing for all of this. Why wasn't there any dialogue? Why wasn't there any steps to prepare rather than, oh yeah, we're working so hard last minute to put this together? It shouldn't have been that way. There should have been a predetermined plan for them.
Right. So I guess, I mean, there's no way to sort of end this on a positive note other than, you know, right now you're healthy. You know, and thank goodness. And, you know, you're doing your best to navigate a really tricky situation. And I think as a field, the childcare field, we are doing the best that we can collectively to work together and support one another during this time. You know, what, I guess a few closing thoughts from you. How do you feel once we come out of this? We will come out of this, right? I mean, we will get to the other side. There's no question that it's going to be a hard and scary time. But how do you feel about childcare in BC moving forward? And I guess, you know, because the BC have been announcing a lot of things for childcare, right? And there's been varying viewpoints on how great that has been prior to COVID-19, right? But how do you feel going forward in terms of your trust with the government as a funder and as a partner in relation to offering childcare? How do you feel?
I don't have any trust in the government. And I think that this is a common feeling. I'm feeling really let down. And I think that this will make history for early childcare. And this is the thing that I'm trying to hold on to as a glimmer of hope and positivity, is that changes will come and they will be huge, and people will be angry and people will be passionate, and we will blaze a new path for early childhood in BC, because that is the only option. There is no way to continue from this and just like, oh yeah, it's fine, we're going to keep going. It's not going to happen. There will be hopefully unionization. There will be hopefully people that are so passionate that want something to change, and I am 100% behind them, and I will be working through my maternity leave to advocate for all of this and make a change.
Right, because it seems to me the bottom line is, the big picture out of this is there has to be a better way. Because this way isn't working. This way is putting a lot of people at risk. And yes, there's already a lot of risk going on, but the level to mitigate risk seems to be kind of non-existent as far as it goes for childcare. And I mean, your story is a testament to that. You know, you're very brave in the face of a massive challenge. I have huge admiration for you.
Thank you. It feels like all I can do is go, okay, what's my next step? What's the next thing I can do to fix this? What's the next thing I can do to try and help? And that's all I'm focusing on right now, is what's the next thing? What's the next thing?
Wow. Well, we'll leave this conversation there. Maybe at a future point in time, you know, after COVID-19, and when we kind of are on the backside of this, and we can touch base again and see how, you know, you're doing with your program. You'll have your beautiful baby probably by that point, and all of those good things, and we can talk some more. I would love to hear an update down the road from you.
I would love to give that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay,
You're very welcome.
Okay. Bye.